The sky above the planet Verax had always been bright and calm. But on that day, it began to darken in a way no one had ever seen before. At first, the people thought it was a storm. Thick shadows moved slowly across the clouds. Then the shadows became shapes, and the shapes became massive warships that blocked the light of the twin suns. The air trembled as thousands of alien vessels filled the sky, their metal bodies stretching from one horizon to the other. It was not a fleet, it was an army. Sirens screamed across the capital city. Tall crystal towers reflected the cold metal ships above. Soldiers rushed through the streets. Families ran for shelter. The ground shook as the first blast struck the outer defense walls. Fire rose into the sky. Smoke spread across the city like a black ocean. Fear moved faster than the explosions. It spread into every heart. High above the chaos, inside a palace made of white crystal and silver stone, the alien queen stood alone on her balcony. She was tall and calm. Her armor shone like moonlight. Her people believed she had no fear, but as she watched the sky turn black, her heart began to race. Her empire had ruled this sector of the galaxy for centuries. No one had ever dared to attack her home world like this. Behind her, generals shouted reports. Enemy fleet numbers beyond count. One said, "Defense grid failing," said another. "They are preparing ground invasion," said a third. The queen did not turn around. Her eyes stayed on the sky, on the moving shadows that swallowed her world. Then something unusual appeared on the edge of the battlefield. One small object broke through the clouds at high speed. It was tiny compared to the giant alien warships. It looked almost fragile. The general scanned it quickly. "It is a human ship," one officer said with surprise. The room filled with confused murmurs. "Only one?" Another general asked. His voice carried disbelief. The scanners confirmed it. One human vessel, no fleet behind it, no support ships, no signals for backup. The queen finally turned toward her commanders. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Humans were known in the galaxy. They were new compared to ancient empires, but they were stubborn. They survived where others failed. Still, one human ship against an entire invasion force made no sense. The small ship did not slow down. It flew directly into the heart of the battlefield. Enemy cannons fired at it. Bright beams of energy cut through the sky. The human ship twisted and turned between explosions. It moved like it had nothing to lose. Then it was hit. A direct blast struck its engine. The ship spiraled downward, smoke pouring from its side. "It is finished," one general said calmly. But the queen kept watching. The ship crashed into the outer war zone beyond the capital walls. A shockwave rolled across the ground. Dust and fire rose high into the air. For a moment, everything went quiet in that section of the battlefield. Even the invading army paused. From the burning wreckage, a hatch slowly opened. Metal fell away. Smoke drifted into the wind. And then a single figure stepped out. He wore dark armor, scratched and damaged from the crash. His helmet reflected the fires around him. He carried one weapon across his back. He stood still for a moment, looking at the endless enemy soldiers forming lines in front of him. Thousands upon thousands of armored warriors surrounded the crash site. One general inside the palace laughed softly. "He will die in seconds." But the human did not run. He did not raise his hands in surrender. He began to walk forward, step by step, toward the army. The enemy troops reacted quickly. Heavy tanks moved into position. Rows of soldiers aimed their weapons at him. The sky above still burned with space battle, but on the ground, all eyes turned to that single human walking alone. The queen felt something strange inside her chest. It was not hope. It was not fear alone. It was curiosity. Why would one soldier come without an army? Why would he walk towards certain death? The first line of enemy troops received the command to fire. Energy blasts shot toward the human like a storm of light. The ground exploded around him. Dust and stone flew into the air. For a second, he disappeared inside the smoke. The general smiled, believing it was over. Then a shadow moved inside the dust cloud. The human rolled forward with impossible speed, using the explosion as cover. He fired his weapon with precise shots. 3 enemy soldiers fell instantly. He moved again before the next blast could reach him. The battlefield changed in that moment. The invading army expected fear, but they saw something else. They saw a human who fought like he had already accepted death. The queen stepped closer to the balcony edge, her heart racing faster now. She whispered quietly to herself, "Why is he not afraid?" Below, the first wave of enemy troops charged toward the lone soldier, thousands rushing at once, their war cries shaking the ground. The human tightened his grip on his weapon and ran forward to meet them, alone against an army. And high above, as her world burned, the alien queen watched the human disappear into the storm of enemies, her heart pounding louder than the explosions. If you want to see how this impossible battle continues and how one human changes the fate of an entire empire, gently consider subscribing to this channel and stay with the story. The battlefield swallowed him in seconds. The first wave of enemy soldiers rushed forward like a dark ocean, their armor shining under the burning sky, their weapons glowing with deadly light, thousands against one. It should have ended quickly. It should have been simple. But the human did not fight like a man who wanted to survive. He fought like a man who had already made peace with death. He moved before the first line could surround him. He slid beneath a heavy blast, rolled behind broken metal from his crashed ship, and fired with calm precision. Every shot found a weak point in alien armor. Every movement had purpose. He did not waste energy. He did not panic. He studied them even as they tried to kill him. The alien soldiers expected rage. Instead, they found control. Explosions tore open the ground. Dirt and fire filled the air. The human used the smoke as a shield. He ran toward a fallen enemy tank and climbed onto it. From that higher position, he saw the shape of the battlefield. He saw their formation, their patterns, their mistakes. Above the city walls, the alien queen watched closely. Her general spoke quickly behind her. Second wave advancing. Heavy gunners ready. He will fall now. But their voices no longer carried confidence. The queen did not answer them. Her eyes stayed locked on the small, moving figure below. The second wave did not rush blindly. They spread out in a wide circle, cutting off escape routes. Massive armored units stepped forward, their cannons large enough to destroy buildings. The human was now trapped in open ground. For a brief second, he stood still, surrounded by enemies in every direction, smoke drifting around him, fires burning behind him. It looked like the end. Then he ran directly toward the largest armored unit. The generals inside the palace stared in disbelief. "He has lost his mind," one whispered. The armored unit fired. A blast of pure energy struck the ground where he had been standing, but he had already changed direction. He moved faster than they predicted, zigzagging between impacts, closing the distance step by step. When he reached the machine, he did not try to destroy from the outside. He leaped onto its side, gripping onto exposed metal. The machine tried to shake him off, slamming into the ground, turning violently, but the human climbed higher, his armor scraping against alien steel. He pulled a small device from his belt and pressed it into a gap between panels. Then he jumped off, rolling across the ground just as the machine exploded from the inside. A shockwave pushed soldiers back, fire rising high into the dark sky. For a moment, the alien army hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The human attacked again, using fallen weapons from defeated soldiers, switching tools without slowing down. He turned their own technology against them, firing heavy plasma rifles he had never seen before, as if he had trained with them for years. More soldiers fell. The queen felt her breath slow, not from calm, but from focus. She had ruled many battles. She had seen many warriors, but this was different. This was not blind courage. This was intelligence mixed with desperation. A new command was given. Snipers moved into position on distant rooftops, hidden among broken towers, their weapons locked onto the human's movement. A silent shot rang out. The human staggered. A blast struck his shoulder. His armor cracked open, sparks flying. He dropped to one knee. The generals nodded, certain it was finally over. But the human did not fall. He pressed his hand against the damaged armor, blood running down his arm. He forced himself back to his feet. Even injured, even surrounded, his posture did not show fear. The snipers prepared to fire again. Before they could, he grabbed a fallen shield device from the ground and activated it. A faint energy barrier flickered around him, weak, but enough that a second sniper shot hit the shield instead of his heart. He looked toward the rooftops, calculating. Then he ran toward a narrow alley between ruined structures, drawing the army after him. The soldiers followed, believing he was retreating, believing the injury had slowed him. But inside the alley, the path narrowed, their numbers worked against them. The human turned suddenly, using the tight space to limit how many could attack at once. He fought at close range now, fast strikes, quick shots, silent movements. One by one, they fell. From above, the queen felt something she had not felt in many cycles: uncertainty. Reports came in rapidly, casualties increasing, heavy losses in ground division, morale dropping. The invading army had expected a quick victory over her empire. Instead, they were being held back by a single human soldier. The human's movements slowed slightly, his injured shoulder limiting him, his breathing heavier now, but his eyes still scanned for openings, still searched for advantage. A massive shock troop unit arrived at the entrance of the alley, larger than the others, stronger armor, meant to crush resistance. The soldiers inside the palace smiled again. This was their final answer. The shock troops advanced slowly, step by heavy step, blocking the only exit. The human stood alone at the far end of the alley, bleeding, surrounded by bodies of fallen enemies. No escape behind him, no path forward except through them. For a moment, the battlefield grew quiet again. The queen leaned forward slightly, her heart racing faster than during the first invasion strike. The shock troop leader raised his weapon, a cannon large enough to erase the entire alley. The human lowered his shield device. It flickered and died out of power. He adjusted his grip on his weapon with his uninjured hand, and instead of stepping back, he stepped forward. The cannon began to glow, charging for a final blast, and the soldier who refused to die ran straight toward it. The cannon fired with a sound that shook the broken walls of the alley. A blast of pure white energy rushed forward, filling the narrow path with light. For a heartbeat, it seemed impossible that anything could survive it. The generals inside the palace turned their eyes away, certain that this time the human had finally been erased. But when the light faded, the alley was not empty. The human had thrown himself forward at the last second, sliding beneath a fallen beam of metal just as the blast tore over him. The beam melted from the heat, but it gave him 1 second of cover. 1 second was all he needed. He rolled to the side, grabbed a damaged explosive from the ground, and hurled it toward the shock troop leader. The explosion did not destroy the giant soldier, but forced the cannon upward. The second blast fired into the sky instead of the alley, burning a hole through the dark clouds above. Before the shock troops could adjust, the human was already moving again. He ran directly toward them, not away, not hiding. He aimed for the space between two heavy soldiers, firing at the weak joints behind their knees. One fell. Then another. The tight alley turned into chaos as the large troops struggled to turn their weapons without hitting each other. From the balcony, the alien queen felt something cold move through her chest. It was not fear for her enemy. It was fear of what this meant. If one human could do this much damage alone, what would happen if more of them came? Her advisors began to speak over each other. "We must destroy him from orbit." One demanded. "Level that entire sector," said another. "He is only one soldier." A third insisted, but their voices carried tension now, not confidence. The queen raised her hand and silence fell across the command hall. She continued watching, her sharp eyes focused on every movement below. The shock troop leader recovered and charged forward, dropping his damaged cannon and pulling a massive energy blade from his back. The blade hummed with deadly power, designed to cut through armor like paper. The human's weapon clicked empty, no ammunition left. For the first time since the battle began, he stood without a ranged weapon, surrounded by towering enemies. The shock troop leader swung the blade downward. The strike shattered the ground where the human had stood, but he had already moved. He grabbed a fallen rifle from a dead soldier, using it not to fire, but to block the next strike. The blade sliced through the rifle, stopping inches from his helmet. He let go of the broken weapon and stepped inside the giant soldier's guard. Too close for the blade to swing properly, He drove a small combat knife into a weak point beneath the heavy armor plating. Sparks flew. The shock troop leader roared in anger and pain. The other heavy soldiers tried to fire, but their leaders stood in the way, blocking their line of sight. The alley was too tight, their numbers useless again. With one final push, the human triggered a power cell from his belt and jammed it into the damaged armor seam. Then he leaped backward. The explosion filled the alley with fire and metal. The shock troop leader fell, his massive body crashing into the broken stone. When the smoke cleared, the human was still standing. Though barely, his armor was cracked in multiple places. Blood marked the ground beneath him. His breathing was slower now, heavy, each movement costing more than the last. Across the battlefield, a strange silence began to spread. Even the invading soldiers seemed unsure. They had never seen one opponent cause this level of destruction alone. Inside the palace, the queen felt her heartbeat grow louder in her ears. She had faced many wars. She had crushed rebellions. She had watched entire civilizations fall. Yet this single figure below unsettled her more than fleets of enemies ever had. "He cannot continue like this," one general said carefully. "He is wounded." The queen did not answer, because she knew something her generals did not understand. The human was not fighting to win the battle in a normal way. He was fighting to send a message. More enemy divisions began to gather beyond the alley, thousands forming new lines, heavy artillery being positioned, air units descending lower. They were preparing to overwhelm him with pure force, to end the symbol he was becoming. The human stepped out of the ruined alley and into open ground once more, facing the massive army that waited. His armor smoked, his shoulder injury worsening, one arm hanging slightly lower than the other. From a distance, he looked small again, and yet no one fired immediately. The hesitation was spreading. The queen felt it clearly now, not just in herself, but across the battlefield. Fear was no longer only inside her city. It had begun to move into the invading ranks. "Launch the orbital strike," one of her closest advisors urged quietly. "If he survives longer, the army's morale will break." The queen's fingers tightened against the balcony railing, her heart racing faster than during the first sight of the darkened sky. She should have ordered the strike. It was logical. It would remove the problem instantly. But something stopped her. She wanted to see what he would do next. Below, the human removed his damaged helmet slowly, letting it fall to the ground. His face was marked with dirt and blood, his eyes sharp and focused. He looked not at the soldiers in front of him, but up toward the palace towers. For one brief moment, their eyes met across the burning city. The queen felt a sudden, sharp realization. He was not fighting because he believed he would survive. He was fighting because he believed someone had to stand. The enemy artillery began charging, massive cannons lighting up across the field, enough firepower to erase the entire area in one synchronized blast. The human stood alone in the center of it all. No cover left, no reinforcements coming. The queen's heart pounded harder than ever before. And for the first time in her long reign, the alien queen began to fear not the army in the sky, but the human on the ground. The artillery cannons did not fire. Not yet, because a new shadow moved across the battlefield. Larger than any soldier, larger than any tank, the ground began to tremble in slow, heavy pulses. Buildings already damaged from the invasion cracked further as something massive approached from behind the enemy lines. The invading army began to move aside in perfect order, creating a wide path through their ranks. And from that path, the machine appeared. It was taller than the palace towers, its metal body layered with thick armor plates, dark and scarred from past wars. Massive legs crushed stone beneath every step. Its core glowed with a deep red light, like a burning heart trapped inside steel. Weapons covered its arms and shoulders, cannons, missile ports, rotating blades. It was not built for battle alone. It was built to end battles. Inside the palace command hall, the generals straightened with relief. "The Dominion Titan," one whispered. "It has never failed." The alien queen felt the air grow colder around her. The Titan was their ultimate ground weapon, used only when total destruction was required. It was not sent to fight soldiers. It was sent to erase cities. Below, the human stood motionless as the giant machine stopped in front of him, its shadow covering him completely. For the first time since the battle began, he looked truly small, like a single figure facing a mountain of metal. The Titan's main cannon lowered slowly. The red core inside its chest pulsed brighter, charging power. Energy lines spread across its armored body like glowing veins. "He cannot survive this," one general said quietly. The queen did not respond. Her heart was racing so fast she could feel in her throat. She told herself this was necessary, logical. The human had caused too much damage, too much disruption. The machine would finish what the army could not. The Titan fired. A beam of concentrated energy shot forward. Not like the earlier blast, this was thicker, slower, more powerful. It tore through the ground toward the human, melting stone into liquid. At the last second, the human ran forward instead of backward. He sprinted directly toward the machine, timing his movement between the beam's tracking adjustments. The blast chased him, but the closer he got to the Titan, the harder it became for the massive cannon to adjust quickly. He slid beneath the machine's front leg as the beam scorched the earth behind him. Heat burned across his damaged armor, his skin blistering from the intensity. But he did not stop. The Titan lifted one leg and brought it down with crushing force, trying to stomp him into the ground. The human rolled aside just before impact, the shockwave throwing him across broken stone. He hit hard, struggling for breath, his vision blurred for a moment. Above, the queen felt her fingers tighten against the balcony again. For a heartbeat, she thought he would not rise this time. But he pushed himself up, slow, pain visible in every movement. The Titan adjusted its secondary weapons, smaller cannons rotating downward, preparing to fire at close range. The human looked up at the massive body towering over him, his eyes scanning quickly, studying its structure. Searching for weakness, he noticed the red core pulsing in its chest, protected by heavy armor plates that shifted slightly each time it fired its main weapon. A pattern. He waited. The Titan launched a wave of smaller missiles toward him. He ran toward fallen debris. Grabbing a damaged hover bike left from the earlier battle, he activated it just as missiles struck behind him. The explosions pushed him forward at higher speed. He drove directly toward the Titan's leg again, this time using the hover bike as a ramp. He angled it toward a broken transport vehicle and launched upward. The bike exploded as it hit the machine's armor, but the blast gave him enough lift to grab onto a lower access panel. The Titan shook violently, trying to throw him off, its cannons unable to target him without damaging itself. Climbing with one injured arm was slow and painful, his blood leaving marks along the metal surface. Below him, thousands of enemy soldiers watched, some in disbelief, some in growing fear. Inside the palace, silence filled the hall. No one dared speak. The human reached the chest area just as the Titan prepared another main cannon shot. The armor plates shifted slightly apart to vent heat, revealing a brief glimpse of the glowing red core. That was the moment. He pulled the last explosive device from his belt, smaller than the others, his final charge. The Titan sensed something and increased its defensive output, energy fields flickering across its surface. The human jammed the device into the narrow opening between the shifting plates, using his knife to wedge it deeper inside. Sparks burned his hand, his armor alarms screaming warnings. There was no time to climb down safely. He pushed away from the Titan's body and let himself fall. The machine's chest plates snapped shut, trying to seal the core. Then the explosion came from within, not loud at first, but deep, a heavy sound like a heart breaking inside metal. The red glow flickered, then burst outward in a violent shockwave. Armor plates tore apart. The Titan's upper body exploded into fragments of burning steel. The massive machine staggered, taking 2 slow steps backward before collapsing forward into the ruined battlefield, its fall shaking the entire city. Dust and fire rose into the air again. When the smoke began to clear, the giant war machine lay broken, its red core dark. And near its fallen hand, the human lay motionless. For several long seconds, no one moved. The invading army stood frozen, their ultimate weapon destroyed by a single soldier. On the balcony, the alien queen felt her breath catch, her heart racing faster than it ever had before. She did not know if the humans still lived, but she understood one thing clearly now. This was no longer just a battle. This human was changing the meaning of war itself. Below, through the drifting smoke, a faint movement could be seen near the Titan's wreckage, and the queen leaned forward, afraid of what she would see next. Through the drifting smoke near the shattered Titan, the faint movement became clearer, the human's hand pressed against the broken ground, his fingers digging into stone as he forced himself to breathe. The explosion had thrown him hard, his armor barely holding together, one side of his chest plate completely gone, the red burns across his skin visible even from a distance. He should not have been alive. Yet slowly, painfully, he began to push himself up again. Across the battlefield, a ripple moved through the invading army. Not a charge, not an attack, but hesitation. Their greatest machine had fallen, their unstoppable Titan reduced to wreckage, and the one who destroyed it still stood, even if barely. Inside the palace command hall, panic began to grow. "In this now," one general demanded. "Fire everything we have," another said. "He is a symbol now," whispered a third. "If he survives, he becomes more dangerous than an army." The alien queen remained silent, her eyes locked on the human below. She felt something deeper than strategy forming inside her, something that had nothing to do with weapons or territory. The human had walked into death again and again, not for glory, not for reward, but because he chose to stand when others would not. Suddenly, alarms echoed across the palace screens. A new fleet signal appeared at the edge of the system, larger than the current invading force. Moving fast, unknown signatures, the generals turned pale. Another empire. One said quietly, "They have been watching this battle." The queen's heart tightened. Her world was already burning, and now a greater threat approached, waiting for weakness, waiting for exhaustion. Below, the wounded human looked up at the sky again, as if he sensed the shift in the battlefield. His body swayed slightly, blood dripping steadily from his injured shoulder, his weapon long gone, his explosive spent. He had nothing left but himself. The invading army finally moved again, this time not charging wildly, but advancing carefully, surrounding him in a tightening circle, heavy restraints prepared instead of cannons. Orders had changed. He was no longer to be destroyed. He was to be captured, studied, understood. The human tried to steady himself as the first soldiers reached him. He swung once, weak but defiant, but his strength was fading fast. A stun blast struck his side, electricity running through his damaged armor. He dropped to one knee. Another blast hit his back. For a moment he tried to rise again, but his body refused. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the burning sky above, still filled with enemy ships. When he opened his eyes again, the battlefield was gone. He was inside a massive chamber made of white crystal and silver light. Chains of glowing energy held his arms and legs in place, not tight enough to cause pain, but strong enough to stop movement. Guards lined the walls, silent and watchful. At the far end of the chamber stood the alien queen. She stepped forward slowly, her armor now removed, wearing ceremonial robes instead of battle gear, her expression unreadable, calm yet intense. The human struggled slightly against the restraints, but he did not bow his head. Even weakened, even captured, his eyes remained steady. "You destroyed our enemy's Titan," the queen said, her voice clear and controlled. "You fought an army alone." He said nothing at first, his breathing heavy but steady. "Why?" she asked, not in anger, but in true curiosity. After a long pause, he answered quietly, "Because someone had to stand." The simple words filled the chamber with unexpected weight. The guard shifted uncomfortably. The generals watching through hidden screens frowned. The queen studied his face carefully. There was no pride there, no arrogance, only exhaustion and determination. "You knew you would not win," she continued. "I didn't come to win," he replied. "I came to make a difference. Outside the chamber, news of the approaching Second Fleet grew worse. It was larger than both current forces combined, its arrival only hours away. The generals entered urgently. "Your Majesty, we must execute him," one insisted. "We cannot risk alliance with humans," said another. "We must focus on the new threat." The queen felt the weight of her throne pressing against her thoughts. If she killed him, her people would feel safe for a moment. They would believe strength had been restored. But she had seen something different on the battlefield, something rare. She turned back to the human, still chained, still wounded. "You stood alone," she said softly. "If I release you, would you stand again?" He looked directly at her. Despite his injuries, his voice did not shake. "If your people need someone to stand," he said, "yes." Silence fell across the chamber. The queen's heart raced harder than during any explosion, any invasion, any war council. This was no longer about pride or power. It was about survival, and perhaps something more dangerous, trust. Far above the planet, the new fleet's shadow began to stretch across the stars, darker than the first, stronger, patient. The queen closed her eyes for a brief moment, then made the choice that would change the future of her empire. "Remove the restraints," she commanded. Gasps filled the chamber. The chains of light flickered and dissolved. The human nearly collapsed without their support, but two guards stepped forward instinctively, catching him before he fell. The queen stepped closer, standing only a few feet from him now. "This is not mercy," she said quietly. "This is necessity." The human gave a faint nod. Outside, the alarms grew louder, the Second Fleet now entering the outer system. The queen turned toward the massive viewing window, watching the dark shapes approach. Behind her stood the soldier who refused to die, and ahead of them waited a war that neither could survive alone. The Second Fleet did not rush in a battle like the first. It arrived slowly, like a shadow spreading across the stars. Its ships were darker, sharper, built not only for war, but for domination. Their formation was perfect, disciplined, silent. As they entered the system, every screen inside the palace command hall flickered with warning signals. Energy readings far beyond what the first invading force had shown. This was not an army looking for conquest alone. This was an empire that erased civilizations completely. The alien queen stood before the grand viewing window, watching the distant lights of the new fleet move into position. Her advisor spoke quickly behind her, voices filled with fear they try to hide. "Their firepower is triple ours," one reported. "Their flagship alone could break our orbital shields," said another. "We cannot survive a direct assault." Behind her, the human soldier leaned against a support pillar, barely standing, his armor partially removed to treat his wounds, burn marks and deep cuts visible across his skin. He looked weak, but his eyes were clear, watching the movement of ships on the holographic display with sharp focus. The first invading army, the one he had fought alone, now began retreating slightly, pulling back from the planet's surface. They had not expected this second force either. For a brief moment, enemies of hours ago became silent observers of a much greater threat. The queen turned toward the human. "You have seen wars beyond this system," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "What do they want?" He studied the fleet formation again before answering. "They don't want territory," he said quietly. "They want control. They wait until others fight, then they finish whoever is left." The truth of those words settled heavily in the chamber. On the main display, the Second Fleet's flagship moved forward, larger than any vessel present, its surface covered in moving armor segments that shifted like living metal. A message signal pulsed from it. Not words, not diplomacy. Only a single transmission: surrender or be erased. The queen felt her heart race again, faster than during the first invasion. This was different. The first enemy had attacked with force. This one attacked with certainty. Ground tremors shook the city as the Second Fleet began firing from orbit. Not targeting armies first, not targeting defenses. They aimed at power centers, communication hubs, life support grids. Precision strikes meant to break order before battle even began. The human pushed himself away from the pillar, ignoring the pain in his side. "They are cutting coordination," he said. If your forces cannot communicate, you fall faster. The Queen nodded sharply. Turning to her commanders, switch to manual relay systems. Use short-range signals. Do not rely on central command. The generals hesitated for only a second before obeying. Outside, explosions lit the upper atmosphere. The sky no longer just dark, but burning in streaks of red and white. The first invading army, still positioned near the planet, now found themselves caught between two threats. The Second Fleet fired without care for alliances or borders, destroying ships from both sides. The message was clear: they would rule alone. The humans stepped closer to the main tactical display. They're strong in direct assault, he said, but they believe fear wins faster than strategy. The Queen studied him carefully. And what would you do? She asked. He paused only briefly. Break their confidence. Moments later, the Second Fleet launched drop ships toward the planet. Thousands of dark pods entering the atmosphere like falling stars. The Queen's city defenses were weakened, many cannons already destroyed. The human looked toward her. Give me a transport, he said. You can barely stand, one general protested. The human ignored him. If they establish ground command, it's over. The Queen saw the same fire in his eyes that she had seen on the battlefield, the same calm acceptance of danger. She made her decision without hesitation this time. Prepare a strike unit, she commanded. He will lead. Shock spread across the command hall, but no one argued further, not after what they had witnessed before. Minutes later, a small assault craft launched from the palace platform, the human inside, along with a selected squad of the Queen's best warriors. Not thousands, not even hundreds, just enough to move fast. The drop pod from the Second Fleet slammed into the planet's surface beyond the capital, opening to reveal soldiers unlike the First Army. Taller, heavier armor, weapons glowing with unstable energy, moving in perfect synchronization. The human's craft landed behind ruined structures near the enemy landing zone. He stepped out slowly, pain flashing across his face as he moved, but he did not slow. He studied the new enemy forces carefully, watching their formation patterns, their command signals, their timing. They rely on central command signals from orbit, he said to the alien squad beside him. If we hit their ground commander first, confusion spreads. The alien warriors looked at him with a mix of doubt and respect. He was not one of them, yet he had fought for them. Above, the Second Fleet prepared another wave of bombardment, believing ground control was secured. The humans signaled the squad forward, moving through broken terrain, using shadows and debris as cover, his injured body struggling but refusing to stop. The enemy ground commander stood near a tall communication relay, directing troops with precise signals, confident, unchallenged, until the human opened fire. The first shot struck the relay tower instead of the soldier, sparks exploding outward, communication signals flickering. The second shot hit the commander's armor joint, cracking its plating. Chaos began instantly. Enemy troops turned in multiple directions, signals breaking apart, coordination failing. The alien squad followed the human's lead, attacking with speed instead of brute force, targeting signal carriers, destroying small but critical units. Above the planet, the Second Fleet's formations wavered slightly as ground data became unreliable. Inside the palace, the Queen watched the screens closely, her heart still racing, but now mixed with something stronger than fear, hope. On the battlefield below, the human stood at the center of controlled chaos once again, facing a force stronger than any before. And as enemy reinforcements began descending from the burning sky, he prepared to stand one more time, not alone now, but still leading from the front. The battlefield no longer looked like a simple war zone. It looked like the center of a collapsing galaxy. The sky burned in layers of fire as 3 different fleets clashed above the planet. Ships from the First Invading Army tried to escape the Second Empire's assault. The Second Fleet answered with ruthless precision, destroying anything that moved without their command signal. And within that chaos, the alien Queen's forces began to regroup under a new pattern, one shaped by the humans. Strategy. On the ground, confusion spread through the Second Empire's troops after their relay tower fell. Their perfect coordination shattered into broken fragments. Units moved without clear orders, some advanced too far, others retreated too early. Their greatest strength, unity, had been cracked open. The human stood near the destroyed relay, breathing hard, blood still marking his damaged armor. Around him, alien warriors fought with renewed courage, not because they were stronger, but because they had seen what one act of defiance could do. Above them, the Second Fleet's flagship shifted position, its massive cannons turning toward the capital city itself. If it fired at full power, the city would not survive. Inside the palace command hall, alarms screamed again, energy readings spiking to critical levels. The queen felt her pulse thunder in her chest. If the flagship destroyed her capital, her empire would fall even if the ground battle was won. "Target the flagship," she ordered, but her commanders hesitated. "Our weapons cannot pierce its outer armor," one said quietly. On the battlefield below, the human looked up at the sky. Watching the flagship's cannons glow brighter, he understood immediately what was about to happen. He opened a direct channel to the palace, his voice weak but steady. "If that ship fires, everything ends," he said. "We cannot break its shields," the queen replied, her voice carrying tension she no longer tried to hide. The human's eyes narrowed as he studied the ship's energy pattern. "You don't break the shield," he said softly. "You make it overload." He quickly explained, the flagship's main cannons were drawing massive power from its core. If forced to fire while its defensive shields were under unstable fluctuation, the energy would clash internally. Not enough to destroy it fully, but enough to disable it. "It's a risk," one general warned. "It's the only chance," the human answered. The queen did not hesitate this time. "Prepare synchronized shield strikes," she commanded. "Focus all remaining orbital weapons on the flagship's forward barrier." Above the planet, alien warships from the queen's fleet shifted formation, firing everything they had at the flagship's shields, not to break them, but to push them into maximum resistance. The shield flared bright under constant impact, energy rippling violently across its surface. The flagship, seeing the attack, responded exactly as expected, its main cannons charged to full power, preparing to fire downward at the capital. On the ground, the human closed his eyes for a brief second, as if calculating the final moments. "Now," he whispered. The flagship fired. At the same instant, the queen's fleet intensified their shield strikes. The two massive energy forces collided within the flagship's own defensive grid. For a split second, nothing happened. Then a blinding surge erupted across the ship's surface. The shield collapsed inward, overloaded by its own cannon discharge. The energy wave exploded backward into the flagship's core systems. The massive vessel trembled, its cannons flickering and dying, lights across its hull fading one by one. The sky grew strangely quiet as the flagship drifted off balance, disabled. Seeing their command ship fall, the Second Empire's remaining vessels began to retreat, first slowly, then faster, pulling away from the system entirely, their perfect formation broken beyond recovery. On the ground, the remaining enemy soldiers surrendered or fled. Silence spread across the battlefield at last. The human staggered slightly, his strength finally reaching its limit. Alien warriors around him steadied him before he could fall. Inside the palace, the queen exhaled slowly, realizing her hands were trembling. The city still stood. Her people still lived, not because of overwhelming power, but because one human had chosen to stand when retreat would have been easier. Hours later, in the great central hall of the palace, the human stood once more before the queen. No chains this time, no guards holding weapons at his back, only quiet respect filling the chamber. "You saved my empire," the queen said, her voice no longer distant or formal. The human shook his head slightly. "Your people saved themselves," he replied. "They just needed someone to remind them." The queen stepped closer, her eyes softer now, her heart still racing, but not from fear. Something had changed inside her during the battle, something she could not fully explain. "You came alone," she said. "You fought armies, machines, empires." He gave a faint, tired smile. Humans are good at standing alone. The chamber remained silent, the weight of the moment larger than any warship above them. The Queen turned toward her assembled commanders and citizens. From this day forward, she declared, humans are not our enemies. Gasps moved through the hall, but none dared challenge her. They had seen the truth on the battlefield. The Queen faced the human one final time. "What reward do you ask?" she said. He looked toward the window where the sky was finally clearing. "Protect your people," he answered simply. "That's enough." There was no demand for power, no request for title or wealth, just a quiet request for peace. As he prepared to leave the palace, escorted not as a prisoner, but as an honored warrior, the Queen watched him walk away, her heart still beating fast in her chest. Not because of war, but because she now understood something that would echo across the galaxy. Humans may fight alone, but when they choose to stand, they change everything.